There are games that are so intertwined into your experience with console and arcade gaming that you can often remember the exact time and place you saw it for the very first time. Some of them you can even remember who you played it with. The Bally Midway classic Rampage happens to be one of those games for me. We had an arcade at my local indoor mall in the mid-1980s called Fun and Games, and it was here that I would play this 3-player epic countless times. Multiplayer cabinets were nothing new in 1986, but this one was 3 players and all at the same time to boot. The gameplay was instantly appealing because it was basically just giant monsters destroying cities all over North America, something that had captured my attention with Godzilla movies years earlier. Rampage was so simple yet so fun, and in this episode we will be taking a look at the original arcade game, a few of its home ports, as well as the sequel that ended up on the Sega Saturn. I hope you guys enjoy Arcade Spotlight, Rampage. The original game was developed and published by Bally Midway in 1986. You had 3 different characters to choose from, including George the Gorilla, Lizzie the Lizard, and Ralph the Wolf, who were all once human and transformed by various experiments. The main goal of each stage was to survive and knock down all the buildings in the level. This was mainly accomplished by climbing each building and beating it down. Of course, the local, state, and federal authorities aren't going to make that easy, and are constantly attacking you. First they start out with pea shooters and hurling small bombs at you, but as the levels progress you'll have army tanks, helicopters, and jets coming in to stop you. The gameplay is rather merciless too, with each monster capable of grabbing helpless soldiers and civilians for a quick snack that does replenish little bits of your life. Be careful though, some things you eat can do you some harm. The real star of the show here is multiplayer, which can be up to 3 players at the same time. You can work together to smash each city efficiently, or you can fight and compete for score. Again, the gameplay and setup here is so incredibly simple, yet so appealing thanks to its roots in Japanese monster movies. It had visual appeal too, with loads of fine details in the buildings and loads of little animations for you and the forces trying to stop you. Perhaps one of the more interesting aspects of the arcade game was the complete lack of music while you played. There are plenty of things breaking and blowing up, but no soundtrack accompanies the action otherwise. Rampage was without question a simple title, but the sheer joy of destroying things with your friends cannot be denied. It was pick up and play on a level you didn't often see outside of the golden era of arcade games, and something burned into my head as one of the arcade's greatest multiplayer games. The first home version I ever saw of this was the NES game in 1988. Contrary to what you typically may hear, I liked this game when I first played it. It took a heck of a hit visually, particularly in color, but otherwise was a solid game in terms of the way it played. It still has most of the things that made the arcade game great, including the multiplayer, though that was cut down from 3 players to just 2. You also lose Ralph the Wolf here. Otherwise, the gameplay is fairly solid, with the objective of destroying cities being the same, and loads of little enemies and their vehicles trying to stop you. Data East would be the company behind this release, on license from Bally Midway, and I think they did a fair job given the limitations of the NES compared to the arcade hardware. Of course, the reason why the NES version is often held in such low esteem is because in 1989, Sega developed their own version of Rampage for the Master System. And man, does it just murder the previous NES game in every way. The first thing you'll notice upon firing up the Master System port is that it now has a full-bodied melody that plays at both the title and during the game. It's a distinctive tune that I have come to associate with Rampage over the years, and playing other versions of the game just seems wrong without it. The second thing you'll notice is that it looks worlds better than the low-color NES attempt. Everything is brighter and more detailed, and the character sprites are much larger. Improvements don't stop in the presentation either. It has the same 2-player mode the NES version had, but also keeps all 3 available players from the arcade game. As if that wasn't enough, it plays incredibly too, and I dare say even better than the arcade game. The buildings have more areas to smash on them, making you feel like you are doing more damage than you were capable of on the NES. To top off this excellent port, you get the choice of an FM soundtrack as well, though the default tunes are excellent in their own right. There's no question about it. While I felt for a first effort the NES game was fine, the Master System version just utterly destroys it in every way. I'll even go so far as to say that Rampage here is one of the finest 8-bit arcade conversions you'll find on the system. The Sega effort used a full 2 mega power, and the smaller card of the NES game never stood a chance. I was also a big fan of the Atari Lynx in its day, and owned Rampage there as well. I love the colored backlit screen of the Lynx, and always appreciated the way games looked in comparison to the Game Boy. Rampage here doesn't fare the best, however. I really like the overall look of the game, especially the relatively huge characters that are animated great, but that means the screen is zoomed in quite a bit and makes seeing around you really tough. You miss the dust on the buildings often as they fall, leading to more damage to you, and you rarely see incoming enemy fire before it's too late. It does play well otherwise, and if you are a Lynx owner, it's a good one to have in your collection. My last big experience with the Rampage IP came with the 1997 release of Rampage World Tour for the Sega Saturn. This was based on the arcade game of the same name, a direct sequel to the original 1986 game. Unfortunately, nothing here aged well enough to care. Instead of beautiful hand-drawn graphics, we get pre-rendered buildings and sprites that look just miserable. Instead of trying to expand the gameplay to new areas, we basically get a repeat of the original game, only now it was 10 plus years after the fact. With the graphics so poor and the gameplay an old hat, it was hard to justify $50 for a game like this. I still had Rampage on my Master System at this point, and preferred how that looked, sounded, and played in comparison. If you take this one on its own merits, I can't deny that World Tour still has some fun left in its archaic design. You still have the multiplayer, and it's always fun breaking things in a video game. This was available on the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 as well. Rampage will always go down as one of my favorite arcade games, and that Master System port was a damn fine way to play it at home. It has appeared in numerous collections over the years, so you have many avenues to enjoy it today. Beyond the previously discussed Rampage World Tour, Rampage would appear again in Rampage 2 Universal Tour, Rampage Through Time, Rampage Puzzle Attack, Rampage Total Destruction, and even a Dave & Buster's Rampage arcade game based on the movie that was based on the original arcade game. Those later games just never seemed to capture the joy and thrill of the original, failing to evolve the gameplay in any meaningful way. The original Rampage is the rare moment where a simple concept was done so perfectly the very first time. It's a snapshot of 1980s gameplay that was as much about where you were and who you were with as what was going on in the game itself. And for that, Rampage will always be one of my favorites. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.